Welcome back, everyone. We are back on the Decision Lab. Dr. Christophe, second time on the show. His research is at the heart of a lot of the things that we talk about. So I'm excited. And today we're talking about his new book. Is it out yet? Like, is it published like live?
Yeah, in
Perfect. Okay,
October.
Neuromarketing AI then. So we're diving deep into the new science of persuasion in an age of intelligent machines. And it is a wild time, people. So buckle up. Can you remind people a little bit of your background, your research, like just who you are, just for people who haven't seen the first one?
Yes, so my name obviously may already suggest that I was born in a foreign country. I was born in France, and very early on took a huge interest in my father's business. He was inventing all kinds of crazy products. In the back of my mind was always the question of who is going to actually buy and why? So I remember having an early interest in the decision-making process that we call consumer behavior, pursued an MBA and finished my MBA, came back to France and worked a few years, but quickly returned to the US. I had the if you will, of working in the US when I was in my 20s, became very early on a CEO of a French-owned company on the West Coast in San Francisco, and moved on to becoming the chief marketing officer of a great company called Grocery Outlet, a large network of bargain-centric grocery goods. And that's, for me, the opportunity was to observe and learn from shoppers. What's really beautiful in a retail environment is you get to actually finally see if what people tell you they will do in your store, they actually do it. And of course, I learned from these observations that there is a major disconnect between what people say is behind their decisions and what is actually happening in the store. And that actually started to frustrate me because surveys and focus groups have been used and continue to be used as one of the primary way to collect information to make decisions about your marketing, your advertising. And the problem is most of it is horseshit. And by that, I mean not that people are lying or decepting you. It's because our rationality is so derailed from what happens really inside our brain. And so I figured that my MBA was just not enough to be a good consumer researcher and pursued a PhD in media psychology with a concentration in neuropsychology because I was absolutely convinced that the new frontier of understanding consumer behavior was neuroscience. Back in early 2000, this idea I thought would be welcomed by everybody until I realized that a lot of people were terribly worried that marketers would now install chips in people's brain. So I had a lot of resistance, a lot of worries to deal with, but I continued this journey, and fast track today, I've basically been credited for starting this brand new branch of marketing called neuromarketing, the crossing of neuroscience and marketing. But there is yet again a major evolution in this field, and that is of the fast and furious growth of AI, and that's why I felt I was long due for explaining how neuromarketing is going to be influencing and impacting all our lives, and whether we should welcome all of it or be somewhat critical of what's happening. And often consumers do not realize and understand the extent to which we have now the capacity to capture a lot of information that is entering data centers via cameras and microphones and so on. So it's really the book balancing the promise, but also the potential threat of the emergence of neuromarketing AI.
I love that. So who would you say this one is for? Who is this book for, would you say?
Well, I like to consider myself a persuasion scientist. And when you look at what we do every single day, there's hardly any hour we're not on a mission to persuade. Could be persuading a colleague, your significant other, your kids. And so persuasion is front and center of human existence. And that's why in the book, I had fun kind of going back, a few thousand years ago to describe how our life was very much about influencing and persuasion. So I think anyone who can recognize how important it is to understand what happens when people want to persuade you And of course, we see now social media and other platforms getting into fake news and manipulative information that frankly creates a massive risk to our ability to sort out the truth from the fabrication. So anyone who has concern about that could, I think, find some very interesting scientific facts about the ability that information has to influence our brain below our level of consciousness. Of course, then people in the business of influencing, marketers, advertisers, and other actors in the persuasion game would find this both a thorough discussion on what persuasion is, how it has evolved because of neuroscience, and where it's going already fast and furious with AI.
Right. Yeah. Something that came to my mind is like, and this is perfect because the first chapter is like the history of persuasion, like you described. Because the question just came to my mind: is marketing good? Like, is it needed? Is it good? And it's like, how do you attribute such a moral quality to something so random? But I couldn't help but thinking it.
Yeah, of course, it's a big question. And what you see in the progression of how persuasion has evolved is you see the role it had very early on to disseminate actually powerful ideas about democracy and the need to integrate and include people into a discussion that ultimately protects our vulnerability to propaganda. And so the Greeks were especially powerful in that matter. Then it got, you could say, co-opted very quickly by religious institutions who saw an opportunity to create narratives that would basically create the guardrails of people moving out of moral conduct. And so lots was credited for, the temple of persuasion was for the longest time, and to some extent still is, churches, right? Then it moved into what we now call the consumer world of more cars, more goods. And if you produce and can, through assembly lines, give access to multiple products, well, you're going to find yourself pretty quickly looking and thinking about how you can motivate people to buy your stuff. And so, yes, that's where the problem of derailment can be identified. And I cite, for instance, the campaign of Lucky Strike, the cigarettes, that in the 40s were finding that it was much easier to sell cigarettes to women, for instance, when you show that the cigarette is on your side to demonstrate how independent you can be as an actor of society. So these links, of course, are deeply disturbing because we know and have known for some time that the cigarettes are killers. And therefore, to even think that you could create and fabricate a narrative that makes them look good is part of the psychological evolution of persuasion. Psychology, and one of the guru of advertising was actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And so psychology had a role very early on in the development of advertising and now evolved into more scientific realm, cognitive neuroscience especially. But AI is taking this even further into the programming of models that do not even need to interview humans, are programmed on large data sets of past studies that were predicting our consumer behavioral habits.
Good Lord. It's wild to keep track of all of these things. Like, is there someone who was the first marketer, like the first convincer of another human, like that spread that mind virus?
I think it's extremely difficult to pinpoint one particular actor. Clearly, there's been major shift in advertising, especially the emergence of media outlets, the emergence of agencies that recognize the opportunity to place messages that were designed to, again, nudge, influence, but also create credibility. I, as you know, have a big interest in the story of how psychedelics have also influenced societies. And Sigmund Freud, no less, was endorsing during his life cocaine as a credible medication. And there are ads that basically were endorsed by Sigmund Freud to recommend the consumption of cocaine. And until he realized through additional observation that people could get highly addicted to it, he kind of took some distance. But the point I'm making is everybody gets trapped into the excitement of promoting an idea or a product. So that part is not necessarily bad. It becomes a problem with the product either are misconstrued or deceptive or bad for your health or for your environment. So the problem I see in persuasion is indeed the association of messages to bad actors.
Yeah, I see that a lot. We see that a lot because we interview brands and like look at their marketing and things like that. Like it's like they'll have an influencer that is talking about a product or service, and on the landing page it says neuroscientist approved.
Yeah.
Influencer is not the neuroscientist, but there is a neuroscientist that developed the product.
Right.
But that association is that nefarious or not? Or like, because the content creator is really good at creating the content and like creating a viral piece of content. The neuroscientist who actually made the thing is not. So it's like, damn, like what's good, what's bad in that?
That's right. But at least what you're citing here are human influencers. The next step is AI influencers. And it's going to be extremely difficult for most of our human eyes and brains to actually identify that these are AI generated avatars, if you will, that play the role of an influencer and can be programmed to be as effective, if not more effective, than human influencers.
Oh, yeah. It's insane. It's crazy. And it's already here. Like Nano Banana 3 just came out, and it's like, what on earth is happening right now? Like, I don't know. Did you ever hear of do you remember the social media platform called Vine?
No.
It was kind of the TikTok before TikTok, but it kind of went out of business. They are looking at the creators of Vine are saying that we want to make a social media that is only human. Like we will actively work our ass off to make sure that there are no AI creators or influencers on our platform, but it will be kind of like TikTok. And it's like this whole nostalgic thing, but for this exact reason, because AI is creating these things.
Yeah, and I do see room for new ways to rethink the way humans play an active role in content production. So we can see this as a threat to our existence. At the same time, we can also see it as raising our consciousness and being a little more bold and fearless about our ability to reclaim the nature of our humanity. So I like to weigh in to those possibilities. Are we relevant? Are we going to be replaced by AI? It's a possibility. Or are we going to actually reclaim Fast and Furious why we should stick around?
Yeah, that is the core question. Where do you sit on this? Like what is, I know we're kind of jumping to the end here, but I feel like this could be quite the discussion. Where do you sit? What are the two sides of this as you look at them? And then where do you land?
Yeah. And I have a big interest in quantum mechanics, and in the study of quantum mechanics you learn about this idea of superposition, that ultimately the world that we see is the world that we observe, that we focus on. And so I think that one of the skills we all have to practice is our ability to actually hold superposition on exactly what we're talking about. The possibility that the world could go in this direction, where we are totally replaced and irrelevant because computers have, of course, surpassed our level of intelligence, and another world where we have managed to live with AI and augment and focus on the promise of AI, which is pretty remarkable, of curing cancer or curing Alzheimer or decoding languages that we have not been able to ever understood. So I am on the side of promoting the idea of holding those two, but hopefully by observing more of the particular route that we all want, hopefully we'll create that reality.
Right. More abundance, like an abundance, or what is Peter Diamandis talks about, like a post-abundance world, or something like that.
That's right. Where, AI will do everything we need to do to be served and live with abundance. It's very utopia is basically the model that promotes this. Hollywood seems to prefer the dystopian route because it keeps getting people to see movies, right?
Surprise, surprise. Something that intrigues me in that vein is like, what do humans do then? Like in that post-abundance world. And the other way I liken it is like, I would never say that Google is an internet company, Facebook is an internet company, or right. It's just Google, it's just Facebook or whatever. When do you think the transition will be? Because right now there's AI companies,
Yeah.
but I really feel like in the future, it'll be kind of like the internet. It'll just be like electricity and the internet and like water. AI is just like there, but we won't have to be like, oh, it's an AI company necessarily. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, especially since there is really no function in an organization that is not completely transformed by AI. I teach AI for Johns Hopkins, so I remind people that whether you're in marketing, in ops, in HR, in production, I mean, none of your jobs are going to be the same because of AI. And of course, a lot of people are terrified at this idea because particularly young adults that are, about to sign up for hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt if they want to have a master's degree or a PhD. So it's really reshuffling how we see our role in the society. Whether or not we need higher ed, for instance, is a huge question right now. A brand new survey that was released today is showing that Gen Z have never been so, you could say, depressed by the promise of the world ahead. And so these data points are pretty worrisome because if our own youth, and I think the bracket is 19 to 29 or something like that, is showing the least amount of excitement about the future, how can we even begin to see AI create that abundance and peace-centric world if the actors of tomorrow are not excited about it?
Something you'd be perfect to answer this. Okay. So you just described data of a group of people that have been persuaded that the future is not abundant.
Yeah.
How did that happen? What has led to that from your perspective?
Watch the news.
I feel like a lot of them don't watch the news though. Like I feel you, but I'm in that group and I don't watch the news. Like, I don't see it.
And that's one way to protect yourself. And I think it might be actually quite wise to do it because for the perspective of that primal brain that I described so much in the book, everything that I see is real, and it's real to me, even in an environment where I'm thousands of miles away from what's happening in Ukraine. If I'm watching and really paying attention to what is happening to the lives of people in Ukraine, my primal brain is triggered by the war. It's triggered by the injustice. It's triggered by all those emotions that ultimately make me a big bath of cortisol. Right? So it takes will. I mean, you have the will, you have the smarts to say, you know what, I don't need that. That doesn't mean you're not necessarily, empathetic or obviously aware that there are pockets of areas in the world where there's tremendous suffering, but you're not sucked into it. The problem is to protect yourself from it enough to create and carve the space, the mental space, where you can really enjoy life.
How do you square that for somebody? Because I get the comment, maybe you get this too. I feel like anybody who is optimistic is like, oh, well, you're just naive and you don't know. There's so many things negative going on in the world. And like, and there's a lot of positive things happening. Like, how do you square that? Like, how do we persuade them the other way? How do we use the things that have been persuaded them into this negative worldview in the opposite direction?
Well, it takes effort. And you're right. Optimism is not highly rewarding in our Western societies. When you go to Eastern societies where philosophies, spiritual systems really insist on being present, of really being mindful that the moments that we have in wherever you may be are opportunities to find peace, are opportunities to empty your brain rather than stuffing it all the time. I mean, just a number that's going to make you really, really think about what I'm saying. On average, people are now at 11 hours of media time a day. Yes. Now, it's not you, clearly, but yes, on average.
It feels impossible.
And that number, I've been tracking that number for 15 years. It's gone from 4 to 5 to 11.
How is media defined? What
Well,
does that
media
mean?
would be, another way to say it is screen time, right? So desktop, iPad, phone, All those are opportunity to consume media. Now you could say, well, wait a second, part of that media could be a documentary on being mindful, right? Sure. But the point is often we don't have the energy to curate and filter content. Look, I'm a pretty big fan of Instagram, but I'm not a big fan of some of the content that's just being thrown at me by some algorithm. And so we have very few control options, if you will, on a lot of those social media platforms. Now, if you say, I'm not going to be engaging in social platform, but rather I'm just going to listen to Spotify while I'm, mindfully being aware of how beautiful my environment is. You have those options, but our brain is under such demands. We have such cognitive fatigue that it's very, very difficult to apply those filters.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and earlier when you were talking about how focus groups don't work because people say one thing, or focus groups, and you were talking about you notice this in retail.
Yep.
Don't work because people say one thing but do something different. It's like, okay, if I had control over, which Instagram for creators, I just got access to a feature where I can like fine tune my algorithm a little bit, and they give me access into like a little bit more of like what the algorithm puts in front of me.
Oh, cool.
However, based on what you just said, how would I know how to fine tune it necessarily?
That's right.
Because I might think one thing is good for me, but then it's like, well, actually, how does one do that? If I did have control of my algorithm, how would I know I'm doing what's best for me?
Yes. You would have to take a certain level of distance from it all. I did that a couple of years ago. I went to Peru and I was a month in the jungle with no internet, no connection. And to be honest, the first few days I was like freaking out because I was so addicted to that stream of news and being connected to, what's going on, the pulse of the world, until I realized that by, day 7, I was finally relaxing and being aware and present to the experience of being in the jungle, to the teachings of these communities that have lived in the jungle for thousands of years, and how soothing that environment can be. And it's really only in those immersive experiences that I think we can finally wake up and teach ourselves some important lessons.
Dang. How do we get more people there? Because we're more connected than we've ever been.
Yep.
But also more disconnected than we've ever been.
Yeah,
So
loneliness
is
a terrible and terrifying growing problem. In Western societies especially, there is really no mechanism in place to hold people who are lonely in the fabric of a community. In indigenous societies, is no such thing as being lonely or sick alone. You're immediately taken by the community and supported by the community. We don't have that system. And of course, the little healthcare that we have is so expensive, so broken, that unless you have money, you can't afford it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm been reading. We had Dr. Ben from Stanford on, and he just wrote a book, Why Brains Need Friends, and was talking about that's what he studies, is how important it is that our brains socially connect and how we're socially wired. And it's just insane and scary how I didn't know some of the stats about when your brain is isolated, how bad it is for your brain.
Yeah.
And then his book just has every call that I get now, I never ignore a family member. I literally there's just so much behavior change that's come from that. And I feel like we need that in that type of push in social media algorithms to get us to connect in real life, like IRL.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I love the title. It's very appropriate to remind people of the power and our need to feed our soul from connecting to humans, to other humans. We were never designed, I think, whether you believe it's, a random process or a divine process. I don't think we were designed to be alone. I don't think we were designed to carve our future solo. Now, some people do. And that's maybe remarkable, but most of us appreciate the support and the connection to a community, whether it's a family circle or whether it's a friend circle. It doesn't really matter.
Which is, I think, where our brains get, and this is a great segue into talking about neuroscience, but
yes,
in the social media, there's social as a part of it. And so there is an aspect of what we feel is really socializing that our brain is like, oh yeah, let's do it more, even though it's kind of like this fake, weaker version of it. So what do people not know about their brains that they need to know in relation to social media?
Well, I think the ultimate risk of assuming social media is feeding your need to connect is to understand that our brain was never, I think, prepared to connect to as many people as we want to or feel we need to. So when you have, 700 connections on Facebook or, 10,000 followers, you just feel you have a community, but no, you have just a bunch of points that are fictitiously, friends according to social media. We were thriving in much smaller communities. Some numbers have been discussed as 30 is the ultimate size of a good circle of community. The tribe numbers could be as far as 100. It is a part of science that was done on companies that tend to thrive, are companies that keep that size of the human social fabric, that people know people's story, people know the kids' names and so on. How can you begin to do that when you go beyond 100? You don't. And so we have these illusions in our brain that we can handle having these huge network. We can't. It's a little bit like customers. What I discovered as a retailer is customers would always tell me, I want more choice. So if you have a limited number of brands in the store for a particular category, people would say, it would be great to have more choice. So I would go back to my buyers and say, well, we really need to add brands for, let's say, toothpaste. But then needle would not move. And I got frustrated and shamed by all the buyers team because I would bring products that wouldn't move, which is terrible in retail. And so I started to observe people. What's going on? When people are in front of 6 brands of toothpaste, we freeze. Because the truth is we want choice. We say we want choice, but we hate it. There's an amazing book. You may have heard of Dr. Barry Schwartz called The Paradox of Choice. And this is one of my top 10 books ever. And in his book, he makes the case, and very, very compelling case, that the paradox of choice is that we say we want choice, but we hate it. And neurobiologically speaking, we function way better with less choice than more. And he goes as far as telling you about speed dating data in the UK. For some reason, in the UK, that particular protocol for finding a future husband or wife is very, very popular. And so he looked at data coming from small gatherings and large gatherings. And paradoxically, more couples are produced in small gatherings than large gatherings.
Dude.
Why? Because less choice accelerates decisions.
What the hell, dude? That's wild. So before we get into how to use AI to protect yourself, tell me more about like how AI is infiltrating neuromarketing and all this kind of stuff in our brains, and like what it's expanding, what it's making worse, what it's making better, that kind of stuff.
So, all right. So reframing what neuromarketing is to your audience for just a second is the study of how brain activity can inform and predict consumer decisions. So I've been working in my lab for a long time, putting EEG on people's head and scanning their facial expressions and so on. COVID put an end to this, but during COVID, the acceleration, technologically speaking, was about moving many of those testing protocols online. So online now you can invite people to share their cameras, and through that camera capture, you can actually decode facial expressions, calibrate eye movements, and get a ton of information that was only possible in the lab. Now, the problem is that many of those technologies are moving in retail environments or city environments, and you don't know the extent to which your face is scanned to identify your emotions, to identify gender, to actually immediately display an ad that is calibrated to you based on these particular sensors. So the proliferation of sensor and technology to do that is real. If you know the movie, one of my top movies, Minority Report, this was described in Minority Report over 25 years ago. In fact, Minority Report, based on Philip K. Dick books, is the most powerful movie in terms of predicting many of the technologies that were introduced in the movie 25 years ago have actually already been possible and real. So we're moving fast and furious into a world where sensors are everywhere, and those sensors are full of algorithms based on pretty powerful models, maybe mine included, that are designed to anticipate and decode and predict what we want and display information and display products and services that ultimately are designed to nudge us, often non-consciously, into the direction of buying or being influenced. Now, some of that, I believe, is a call for paying attention to certainly the legal environment, the ethical environment of these systems is all in question. But because it's appearing so fast, our legal system is totally overwhelmed. Our will, particularly in this, world that we live here, the will to create more laws is not very strong. In Europe, there's historically more appetite, shall we say, or more will to regulate abuse in advertising. But in countries such as the United States, there's very little appetite and very little systems in place to do so.
Which is, in your opinion, good or bad?
Well, it's, I think,
kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it is. Here's been my argument on this very difficult question. There are vulnerable audiences. And based on neuroscience, you can identify pretty quickly that youth, and I'm talking below the age of 20, not so much the age at which people are technically declared adults. We know that the brain is maturing very slowly, much slower than we actually imagine. And the last part of the brain to mature is called the frontal lobes, as the name suggests, right in front of your head. And in those areas, we actually can see and protect ourselves from, deceptive tactics. But below that age, we are extremely vulnerable. We can recognize that maybe it's an ad, but we can't recognize the extent to which it's actually manipulating us. So my worries has always been about protecting young people, and especially below the age of 18, to the manipulation of bad actors in the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry, that have products that will not thrive unless they are early adopters. You cannot make a buck selling cigarettes unless you convince a 14 or 16-year-old to actually take the habit. And once they do, it's going to be extremely difficult because the product is addictive, of course, right? Alcohol is the same. I grew up in France where, in fact, alcohol is not as vilified as it is for youth. And there is an interesting paradox here, and that is, if you have a glass of wine when you're 16 and you're surrounded by your family, maybe it's actually healthier than hiding yourself in a dorm and go through binge drinking. When I did my MBA, was absolutely shocked to see how binge drinking was normalized in a campus environment. You can't see that at all in France, even though I'm sure there are environments like discotheques and so on. But in the context of comparing, what I found to be true in the US, in France, I had to ask myself, well, you know what? Maybe we should train and actually guide young people to understand the danger that these products have if they are being abused.
Right. Something you keep mentioning, you keep saying the word manipulate specifically. I'm curious how you delineate between manipulation and influence.
Yeah, great question. I always describe persuasion as a spectrum that goes from influence, you could say mild influence, nudging is another way to say it, though nudging has been associated with manipulation. And then, of course, sheer, extortion, propaganda, manipulation, and so on, deception. So we know that persuasion is a scale, right? And it's important to, first of all, teach that to young people, to integrate that in the curriculum of a high school, if not a middle school. So there's a complete lack of skills, literacy on what persuasion is. That's number one. Two, there are, again, I think, borders or banks that the legislature should look at. And that could be for certain categories of products or even news products, to be perfectly honest. We see, for instance, movies that were once rated, R, come to platforms like Netflix where anybody of any age can access that content. We've just forgotten what it means to protect our youth from, cruelty and normalization of gun violence and so on. I'm horrified each time I even attempt to watch a movie in an airplane that so many people are, possibly going to look at it and see it. So I think we've basically lost discernment. We've lost the capacity to recognize how dangerous that content can be on the mental health of a lot of young people.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing too is what determines what side of that spectrum you're on. Like if I am trying to influence you to use my cure for cancer
Yeah.
versus I'm selling you a cigarette, like is the cigarette person manipulating and the the cure for cancer is influencing, or like
Well, there's an arbitration that sometimes our brain can't make. You would hope in an evolved society there are people that do worry about the extent to which some actors can manipulate freely with no penalty, no punishment whatsoever. And so it just speaks again to the kind of governance we see happening. And some of that governance, by the way, is going to be outsourced to AI. It's already true in countries like China, where there's a huge amount of surveillance that is no longer just about putting cameras and check if people are, breaking a bank, but actually going to the extent of scanning and decoding facial expressions that could signal anger or aggressiveness.
how much of this is good versus bad too? Like you mentioned the Minority Report thing, and
Yeah.
like I think the biggest thing that people, when I think about Minority Report, I think like he looks over at the wall and it changes to the thing that relates to him
That's
best or
right.
whatever.
That's right.
How much of that is good or bad though,
I
necessarily?
I agree with you. I think it's a fair question. And that's why in the book, I do have that level of optimism. I do recognize that a lot of the messages that we get, particularly in advertising, is annoying. It's noise. It's costing glucose and oxygen that we should keep, So the level of distraction and fragmentation that we all experience is unprecedented. And our brain was never designed to handle as much stimulation, right? We face in any given day the amount of information we would face 80 years ago during our entire lifetime. So think about that for a minute. Our brain has not evolved in 80 years to augment our bandwidth. Our bandwidth is as ridiculously small as it's ever been. Okay? And so we continue to try to stuff more information, which creates anxiety, stress, and potentially makes us pretty unhealthy. So if neuromarketing AI, to some extent, can get rid of a lot of that noise, and you're right, like cater and prepare messages that are already relevant, optimized, that we welcome because they are in fact messages that we wish we would have about certain interests that we have and so on. Hey, maybe that's not too bad.
That could not be too bad. It's just like, it feels like it would shift is capitalism the right way to go? Is the way that we do government the right way to go?
Yep.
Who determines these types of things? Like, because maybe alcohol is not good, but maybe it is in a certain, like everything is a spectrum kind of argument,
Sure.
Like alcohol is not good, but maybe it's okay when you're creating memories with your friends or something. Like, just not my argument.
Course. I mean,
but
moderation is the key, and you will find people who are pretty adamant about saying, it's poison, and it can be seen that way. I remember the whole discussion around cannabis because for such a long time, researchers were paid a lot of money to find what's wrong with cannabis. And it wasn't exactly that difficult to point to the effect that cannabis can have, particularly to a young adult, in terms of delaying that maturation process that I was talking about, right? It delays the connections between synapses in your frontal lobe. So if you're a 16-year-old and you're smoking constantly pot, not a good idea to your frontal lobes. At the same time, my youngest boy, has Tourette syndrome, and cannabis is by far one of the best way to mitigate many of the issues, tremors and tics that come with the disease. So it's really unfair to have invested as much as we did for such a long time on a plant medicine for people who are, let's say, addicted to opioid. There is no better shift if you are addicted to opioid than moving to a cannabis product. Now, you could say, well, you're moving from one problem to another. Maybe, but if you do it, with consciousness and guidance, you can solve a problem that ultimately could kill you, right? So I think we're entering a society where we have the capacity now to weigh in Who are the best people to responsibly use these products? It's the same thing with psychedelic assisted therapy. We know it's not for everybody. We know the legalization is going to take forever, but ketamine has already been legalized. Psilocybin is probably next, MDMA possibly, and we will see what has been described as pure evil has actually the capacity to heal people from massive traumas or severe addictions. So hopefully we will see AI play a huge role in that. Why? Because AI can actually consolidate all kinds of storytelling material. Journaling is what a lot of people who face addictions and so on are asked to do. Well, AI can sift through those notes and extract some themes that can be essential in your recovery.
Have you thought about how this stuff like this gets implemented? Like, to me, it almost feels like there's got to be some type of freaking war or something, because it's like, what company like Netflix is going to sign up for a neuromarketing AI solution that is better en masse for everyone? Because it is like, okay, this is what Cody specifically needs, and this is what be the best thing for his life and his creating more abundance in his health, his mental health, his emotional health, all that stuff. That might be opposite of what Netflix wants, which is me to watch more of their stuff and show me, give me an ad for the Stranger Things ad that's coming out soon. Why would Netflix sign up for that? And how, like, yes, it's better for everybody, but not for Netflix.
They actually are probably one of the most advanced user of neuromarketing AI. So it's funny you mentioned them, and while their algorithms are pushing, and you're right, sometimes with a lot of deception, content that is supposed to be relevant because I like this particular movie, I find that they're improving their capacity to predict truly what I like. I'm French, and I love French content, and it's been absolutely remarkable actually for me to be discovering these kinds of shows that, because I don't live in France anymore, are actually available on Netflix. So I do see the value of these platforms that are intelligently nudging to the content that is truly of interest to me. But there is always noise. There's always the marketing ploy where you're being pushed into a content that is just not for you. And we resent that. We're like, come on, stop that. But you will see that improve.
Macroly, though, if we went to macro, like Netflix versus Hulu versus HBO Max or something like that, like, and we think of, how does stuff get in front of you currently? There's like YouTube ads, there's Google ads, there's, well, I guess YouTube and Google are the same. There's Meta ads, like, in that kind of stuff. And companies pay Meta to let Meta's algorithm put their ad in front of the right people or whatever. Like, how do we get these principles of, how do we change it at that systemic level, I guess, is my biggest question. Because how are we going to convince Facebook that, oh yeah, you should put stuff in front of Cody that's better for his mental and emotional health, not necessarily just stuff that he will click a buy button on?
So a lot of it is how we can continue to capture mostly text and find patterns in the text that can reveal more unconscious mechanisms of choice, right? So in my pursuit of neuromarketing models, I have learned that just relying on text is not enough, but that was prior to Gen AI. And what Gen AI has proven is that when you have enormous amount of data, and particularly, book content, half of the content that is currently training LLM comes from Reddit. Now, pause for a minute on that. It's either pretty impressive or it's terrifying. And the reason I say it's terrifying, because who's vetting the people that are participating in Reddit, right?
Right.
Nobody. Now, I'm a scientist, and so I have a bias towards credible sourcing, but our AI models are being trained on that stuff, right? That's scary. I think it will evolve towards better integration of information that we're willing to share. For instance, you could be willing, if you're invited, to share your camera while you watch a Netflix show. And Netflix could say and disclose that they have this new tool where they're going to calibrate your face on not facial recognition, but facial expression decoding, and identify which of the scenes seem to be more pleasant to you, which of the scenes seem to really tap into interest that you have. And from that, you could say, optimize what you said earlier, optimize all the algorithms and make sure that I have content that is as pleasing as this particular experience, right? So I'm saying we have more opportunities now with AI to deliver and share massive amount of information that these models are able to crunch. Surveys are terribly simple in terms of how you decode a survey. Yes or no question. That's 0-1. But when you get into capturing facial expressions or EEG, brainwaves, you're talking thousands of points per second sometimes. And the AI engines has the opportunity to find patterns in that data, which is quite stunning. And of course is why we're able to decode, protein folding in just a few years. We've decoded with Google DeepMind 200,000 proteins, and it would take years to decode 10.
Right. I'm curious, do you think there will be a company that kind of emerges that sits between the companies that want to advertise to people and the consumers themselves? Like, as like an arbitrator between like what actually gets put on the billboard in the Minority Report thing for each unique individual?
Yeah, it should be the FDA of persuasion in a way. I think it's a great proposal.
Yes.
Cody for president.
It just
No,
seems
seriously,
like very necessary.
of course. But as you can tell, the appetite of some parties or administrations for more regulation is quite limited. And so it'll take a lot of political power to put this in place. But I
Do you
agree
think it
with
has
you.
to be political? Like, why does that have to be political? What if an individual consumer company did this? Or like there's DAOs and like there's, I don't know, like or there could be like I've envisioned like a data guild. You and I
Yeah,
could sign up for this
yeah,
data guild, and
yeah,
this certain guild says,
yeah.
I'm a maximalist. You can have access to any piece of my data you want, companies. And then the guild kind of collectively bargains for that. And then there's another guild that's like, I only want you to give unidentifiable biometric data to companies. And
Yeah,
I'm in that guild and you're in
yeah,
a different guild or something
yeah,
like that. Or
yeah.
I don't know. I feel
Yeah,
like that could be
it's called an
possible.
opt-in approach, and it took years for Facebook not to point fingers, but I've always been quite, shall we say, concerned, and that's an understatement, about this attitude that you don't want your users to have options. You basically force them into sharing information, and they're never going to look at the fine print. Well, we should. You're absolutely right. Be invited to more opportunities to actually think twice before we share our data. And the naivete of most users of social media is now being revealed through, of course, abuse, through, of course, manipulation that happened, for instance, during Cambridge Analytica, when people discovered, oh, wait a second, this little survey that I did on my personality profile actually became used and recycled for political campaigning. It's terrible. It's terrifying that data that is collected for research purposes would be fired back and used back and recycled back to manipulate people.
Right. Well, which is why I don't think it should come from, I mean, shit, dude, like who is going to trust Facebook or somebody now to be like, oh yeah, here's this guild that we just created. Like, that's why I almost feel like it needs to come from the collective.
Of course.
Almost.
Yeah. No, what you're talking is kind of the blockchain idea, right? Where you put in place a system that has no governance, that is self-governing. And I'm quite hopeful at the idea that this could eventually happen. Power to the people, basically. And it's in fact, curiously, probably going to be possible because of AI, because we are even more so than ever connected through a technology that is establishing links to massive amount of populations.
Right. Yeah. It kind of, I can't remember if it's Naval Ravikant or I can't remember whose idea the network state is. I don't know if you've heard of that, but he talks about these self-governed network states essentially that become sovereign in their own right, but they are DAOs and blockchain and all this. He has this whole, he breaks everything down. Like what is a country? What is a state? How do you get sovereignty? And breaks it all down to like its bare minimum, and then uses AI and blockchain and technology to kind of build it back up. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe it could be like a little network state.
Yeah, and I think curiously, I do think that neuromarketing, some of the teachings of neuromarketing, which is the value of curating information that ultimately cuts through the noise and the excessive cognitive fatigue that we're all experiencing. I do think that as long as we can protect ourselves from content we don't want, from bad actors that will always exist in any kind of society. And I do see Europe, because of course I kind of have my heart still in Europe. I do see Europe being way, way more proactive about this than in the US, for instance. Because now most companies are international, if you are compelled, as let's say a social media platform, to adjust your platform to meet European standards, why not keep those standards for the US, right? It's going to make, it's a little bit like if you penalize car makers for, emitting too much CO2 in a state like California, are you going to modify your cars so that they can pollute in Texas? Yeah, I know some people will, just because they can, right?
Bro,
But it doesn't make
yeah.
sense, right? So you can hope
No.
that those standards are, like you said, are going to become new norms of behavior.
Something that you've mentioned a couple times here too is that we don't know what we don't know almost. Like we don't know what's good for us. We don't know what's bad for us and that kind of stuff. Like how do we get closer to that source truth of how do we get closer to knowing what we actually want and need? Is there a way to do that?
Probably one of the biggest shortcut is what's called gut feeling. And, the expression has been used and overused in all kinds of contexts, but we literally have 300 million neurons in our gut system, which is called the enteric nervous system. And it's constantly picking up, information from the health of our gut that can convey risk, that can convey through what we call intuition, the possibility that we're being manipulated, the possibility that we are, exploited. And so rather than trust, as we tend to do in this society, the rationality of our mind, I think we have to be closer to our body. I think we have the system in place, and some neuroscientists have actually dared to say that the stomach, or our gut system, to simplify, because it's more than the stomach, is really our second brain. And so if we recruit that more on a more regular basis, if we meditation will teach you to pay attention to your breathing, to pay attention to your homeostatic balance. And so the more we can connect to our body, I think the closer we become from intuiting what's good, what's bad for us.
Something not to push here or push back, I suppose, but I would just love to hear your perspective because I'm trained in a trauma therapy called IFS, or internal family systems, and I work with people after abusive relationships or toxic breakups where trauma has shifted, maybe I would use maybe a different word, but for our purposes here is shifted what their gut would tell them they should do. And so they land in abusive relationship after abusive relationship because they're following their gut, right? How would you delineate between like intuition and like what I would call like a trauma response or like a baggage or something?
Okay, so now you're going in a completely different frame of reference, which is a great interest to me because, as you know, I published a book on the neurospiritual basis of our self-healing property. And in trauma work, what I think is front and center beyond the gut in its role is, of course, the personal stories and the stories that have unprocessed traumas tend to completely dysregulate your nervous system. So in the work that I've been exposed to, particularly in the use of plant medicine, we find that people cannot heal fully without accessing something that is bigger than the gut, bigger than the brain, which is essentially their soul. And the soul and the connection to something bigger than yourself is a journey of discovery, of looking back at your biographical story, at your ancestral origin, and the degree to which you may have inherited some of that trauma. I mean, a lot of people don't actually know the extent to which this is possible. You probably know about epigenetics and the extent to which you have no responsibility for creating if you're inheriting them. but you have maybe the responsibility of stopping that transmission for future generations. So very complex. I'm glad you're doing IFS because it's an incredibly powerful model. But yes, you're right. In that context, the reliance on your gut can be more of a source of additional stress and worries than peace.
The thing that scares me is that like 86% of people have unprocessed trauma that they're unaware of.
Yeah.
And so then we have way over the majority of people who have these things they can't, like the number of people who know generational trauma, that even that term exists, is probably so few. Yet they're following their guts necessarily. And so that's what freaks me out the most is in the context of trauma, you're like, well, you can't trust your gut as much, which hell yeah, I agree with that completely. The problem of trauma is so much larger than I feel like people think, because they think it's like big T stuff, but there's such even tiny things that can shift your gut feeling in certain directions we're unaware of.
That's so true. And I suspect you're familiar with the work of Gabor Mate in that arena. And he completely shifted the conversation around trauma by suggesting that trauma is not just this extraordinary, unusual event, could be an accident, a case of crime or abuse, but it's something that happened often when you're young, that is so big, that is so sudden, that your brain couldn't process it. So it's related to our capacity to make sense of it. And to protect ourselves in those situations, particularly when we're young, we repress it. We store it somewhere deep into the body. And it's only later that some of that can resurface in coping mechanisms that are unhealthy. And so, yes, this burial process of traumas is front and center the big challenge of people who are confronted with the ultimate cost of not dealing with it.
So we crisscross the two things.
Yeah, for people who are, coming back from war zones and stuff. But we've mistakenly assumed these are the only people that have trauma, soldiers. No. Right. There's a lot of traumas around. And I'm sure in your work with families, you will find that everybody has had some form of traumatic experience. Now, were they able to process it? Some people do. And it's often unexplainable, actually. In fact, even with soldiers, it's very weird that some people are actually coming completely fine out of war zones, whereas some others are extremely affected by it.
It's so fascinating. If we were to crisscross these two conversations we're having, though, with AI and trauma, what is your perspective on, will AI ever replace therapists? Do you think AI could help people process their unhealed trauma? Like, what?
I think there's a form
what do you think about that?
Yeah, I do think that there's a form of training that is, of course, not what is happening to the current language models. As I said, when you learn that 50% of the training data is from Reddit, you can only imagine what kind of therapists that would ultimately do. So I think there is going to be a second phase, probably through agentic AI, where we pay more attention to the highly trained, specialized agents, such as a therapist, that would be not trained by, Reddit, but a curated collection of therapeutic models. You would expect to bring into this some teachings from Jung or Gabor Mate and or other models that have been known to be extremely powerful. IFS, for instance, could be, of course, built into the training data. And then from that training data, you can instruct the agent to have certain levels of autonomy in the discussion of conditions that people report are creating, sadness, despair, or suicidal ideas. But you would have to chaperone these models and these agents for a while so that there is always the human interaction or control to some extent, because lives are at stake. And we see these stories that are coming from and center on media of people sometimes choosing to end their own life because the AI model has been trained to basically say, yes, you're great, everything you say is wonderful, which is the bias ChatGPT has openly said they trained their model on. That's why when you say anything, it's like, oh, that's such a great idea. And they've toned down that problem, actually. They've toned down, like Gemini. Yeah. If you go to Gemini has not trained their models to approve or congratulate you on every idea you share with the model.
Right. someone who is you span trauma healing, all this kind of stuff. Not a moment ago, a little bit ago, you mentioned that getting to a soul level is how you really do some of the deepest healing and things like that. From that perspective, would an AI agent like you're describing, one that's trained on all these things, ever really be able to do the soul level healing that a human to human connection can create? Like, do you think that's even possible?
I do.
Does that mean that you think AI has a soul of some sort, or that
No,
like,
I know. I think that's the problem, and maybe the mistake that we make is we decide as humans that it is the property of our human soul that gives us the exclusive competence and right to be of guidance to people who are disconnected from their own soul. I mean, I've worked in this space for some time now and done a lot of work with people who are in difficult situations. And a lot of that guidance is prescriptive, is coming from, text from Carl Jung, text from, Stan Grof is another, mentor of mine that's been really at the forefront of psychedelic research and holotropic breath work and all these modalities that are helping people have experiences during which they actually access to the answers they need. So I think there are answers that can be provided to some extent by AI models, but there are experiences that are going to reveal the type of answers you never get from AI. And so I think we need to discriminate and make the difference between somewhat the pragmatic role of a therapeutic agent, right? And the specific interaction and creation of experiences that are truly human and tap into areas of consciousness that the AI model can't understand. I don't think there's an AI model that can understand what it means to have a psychedelic experience.
what a sentence that is, Dr. Morin.
Big challenge to
relation-
OpenAI. Show me what happens with ChatGPT on psilocybin.
Yeah, no kidding. That would be the qualia, I feel like, is what it's missing. In relation to the experience, there is, when two nervous systems, it sounds like you've done some of this work, but when you're really helping someone through something, there's like a coherence between my nervous system and my client's nervous system, yeah. It feels like. And it feels, would you say that is just my own hubris as a human, that connection and that nervous system synchronicity or coherence, is part of the healing, and it's not, and I think, it's not that prescriptive, but that could be, but am I just like, I think that I'm not the zombie and you think that you're not the zombie as far as consciousness is concerned? Could a machine eventually trick my nervous system to believe that have that same coherent feeling and then get the same healing benefit?
Yeah, I think you're touching on something obviously extremely critical in any form of healing, and that is the synchronization, if you will, of energies. And so if you can display both empathy, compassion, understanding from one human to another, that doesn't seem to be the kind of effect a machine would have. And so we will continue, I think, to find that our capacity to connect two humans in that world of energy is not going to be possible from one machine to a human. Now, having said that, there are some people, and robots are going to show up in most of our lives at some point, and some robots could behave and be trained to have empathy. And the question remains, I don't know that I have the answer, will that mimic, that cloning, be done so skillfully that you will begin to see an AI model so human that our brain is fooled to ultimately accept that maybe it has way more than just an algorithm. I don't know if you saw the show Foundation, which is, I think, one of the most incredible show put together by Apple TV. But the central character, as you know, is this woman robot, which has this struggle based on her algorithms of whether or not she has feelings or even autonomy in her ability to feel for their rulers, so to speak. And it's a very compelling question, and especially with the kind of, actor that is actually acting the robot. So I think we don't know what we don't know, but chances are that our humanity is not going to be replaced anytime soon.
If that, to me, bluntly, it does not seem like that crazy of a leap
Yeah.
for some type of robot to be able to trick a human. Trick, because essentially I'm tricking you right now that I'm conscious.
Yeah. Could be an
Like,
avatar.
if you think about it.
For
So,
all I
like,
know, I could have Cody AI in front of me.
right, like, right, technically. And so to me, it doesn't feel that wild of a leap to think that we'll get there eventually with like AI. And like, there's research that I saw that they asked actual doctors and AIs to answer, to like create responses and things like that to patients essentially. And then had patients rate how empathetic the responses were. And by far and away, the AI responses were rated more empathetic than the actual doctor ones. And so it's like, and that's just an LLM.
Yeah,
We're not even at some of this crazy stuff. So I feel like we'll get there. What then, from your perspective, makes us human, makes us special, makes us different? What is the thing, in your opinion, that's like different?
I think it gets back to emoting. And you mentioned earlier the whole growth of what's referred to now as emotion AI. We are emotional beings, and the chemicals that are produced in our body to connect our neurons, neurotransmitters that you've heard of, dopamine, oxytocin, have yet to be programmed in an AI model. And these chemicals have an incredible level of intelligence to modify our moods, to decide what we remember and what we should forget. We are far, far, far from having AI models being able to mitigate and change the level of chemicals that ultimately make us human. We also have something absolutely remarkable, which is called touch. Skin is the largest organ in the human body, and we have millions of sensors that are giving us a capacity to hold hands, to hug the people we love. And whenever we have those interactions, not to even mention the sexual experience in and on itself, we have these kinds of human response and cocktails of emotions that are totally unique. So I think as much as we can now, cultivating what's unique about humans is not our intelligence per se as we define it. It's really our capacity to emote. It's our capacity to feel. And that's, I think, an opportunity for all of us to tap into that more than the intellect. The intellect, to some extent, can be now outsourced, and that's what I do. I put a lot less time in computational effort that I've done in my entire career with all these data sets. I just let the AI deal with it. But that gives me more space for ultimately being more human, more aware, more awake, more present in this beautiful surrounding of mine, which is, of course, as you know, Hawaii. So I think we are going to look at opportunities, and we may miss those opportunities if we're not mindful.
So our ability to emote is one of the things that keeps us different for now. Do you think that goalpost will ever stop moving? Because like I just cannot help but think, okay, well, eventually machines will be able to feel and emote. So then what makes us human? What makes us different when machines can emote as well? Or
they can't
are we just going to
emote.
merge?
They can be programmed to simulate some of the patterns of behaviors and movements that come with emotions. An AI model doesn't think it is programmed to achieve certain computational steps. And so I think we need to constantly remind ourselves that we're talking about machines that have been coded and have the capacity to learn on their own based on the data that we supply. And true, there is aspect of that humans have done for a long time. But there are limits to the sensory capacity of AI models. And that's why you see robots so awkwardly moving around and having so much trouble just, putting food into their mouth, their virtual mouth.
Right. Well, I don't know if you've read On Intelligence or 1,000 Brain Theory by chance by Jeff Hawkins, but he talks about one of the sensory motor like reference frames that our neocortex runs on is like the simplest but yet most complex thing, like is the hardest thing for machine learning AI to replicate, is literally just being able to reach into space and grab this.
Yeah, that's right.
Like that, it's the super, super simple things that we take for granted that make us the most human and unique and different from these models that can out calculator us, but like it can beat me at Go, it can beat me at chess, but it can't stand up, walk away from the table and go to a family Thanksgiving.
Exactly.
Like it cannot do that. And so, but that is almost so simple in a way. And so people are like, well, they want us to be more human because we have more complexity. But in reality, what differentiates us is almost the simple things, I feel like.
Yeah. And I mean, again, we're just at the beginning of this massive shift
Yeah.
where literally billions of people are having to confront their potential annihilation, right? The potential that if you're a doctor, you may not need any longer to hold on to your job if machines can diagnose better than you can. At the same time, doctors are able to cross-reference and take in information, not just from data, but from their feelings, from their intuition, from their experience of having confronted a lot of cases that may not have ever been in the training data sets of a computer. And so I think we will find that we can find maybe new ways to focus on the true extraordinary skills that we have forgotten about because we've been busy processing information that now can be processed in seconds by a computer. So hopefully it will free up energy and it will make us better at asking questions rather than just focusing on answers. It will make us better at enjoying lives that are not 12 or 15-hour days. I mean, our ancestors and indigenous societies, when I was in Peru, enjoy, long days in terms of being on, the farm and growing food and so on, but very mindful schedule that make you move through the experience of being human with more flow rather than noise and fragmentation.
Yeah. I do hope that as all of this stuff advances, we kind of get back to that place. And because I guess my biggest fear is that we become, just think about it, like we've gotten more time necessarily, or we've had tools that the calculator is an easy example. We didn't have to calculate as much basic math anymore. So now we were able to do more advanced things, and it became a different type of more. Instead of basic math, now we're doing more advanced math. And so we filled the time up with something more advanced, but the time was still filled up. I feel like we could slip into that pretty easily as well, instead of this flow state, loving, chill vibe.
And that's, by the way, that's the early data that's coming out of corporate America, especially on AI. I mean, there's been, as you know, more unnecessary emails of people now sending you summaries of conversations that they just had with you, which add absolutely nothing to the experience other than more emails to your inbox that are completely unnecessary. Exactly. And so we're seeing actually a drop of productivity, which is ironic because, of course, these layoffs are advertised as, a huge gain of productivity. I'm not sure. We're going to see a lot of improvements in service levels. And if you have any problem with the product, as you know, you get no help whatsoever. And chatbot are the most annoying aspects of AI for the most part because they're dumb, right? So we are really in that evolution of an AI-driven society, which on paper is supposed to make our life easy and fluent and efficient. In the reality of our experiences is making it often much more frustrating. I have my share of fight with AI every single day, and so does my wife. And it's like, what's going on? Why am I renting at ChatGPT? It's not going to happen, right? And yet I do.
Dude, I do the same thing. Like literally today I was asking for like a basic description for a form that I needed to create or whatever. And it gave me like almost 2,000 word. And I'm like, I literally in all caps, I'm like, what the hell is this?
Yeah,
like this is way too freaking long. Make this way shorter. I wasn't like literally mad, but I was just like, what were you thinking? Why would I use this? It was just...
I just posted on my LinkedIn profile earlier today a beautiful ad from Alfa Romeo where this guy is entering his presumably self-driving car, but it's asking like thousands of questions before he can start. And so he gets really frustrating. He gets, oh, should I do this? And then he goes, I just want to drive. And then the next frame is him driving the Alfa Romeo instead of outsourcing the driving to an AI model.
Damn. That
Look it up. It's a campaign from Israel, as a matter of fact, that has received a lot of views.
That's some interesting. I mean, you're seeing more of that now too. There are companies that overtly are saying this was human made, and they are like pitching their tent on. We don't use generative AI. We don't use like we're all of our stuff is humans. Like it's not AI.
There you go.
So, which
Yeah,
could be
and
a
back to your
differentiator in the
question,
future as well.
your comment on that social network that is human. I do think that it will help us all wake up to our humanity, hopefully to really see the value of being conscious, which, to be honest, is probably the biggest crisis of humanity right now. Without consciousness, we can't see ourselves. We can't observe the toxicity of many of our patterns. We can't see that people need help. We just ignore them. We are so distracted that we don't have the bandwidth or the energy to have a little bit of empathy or compassion.
Yeah, it's why. How would you? This is like the question of questions for any neuroscientist. But how would you define consciousness? If you think we need to have more of it, how do you know we would have more or less of it? What's your definition, or like how do you your use the motto you use?
So the big problem, as it's often described, of consciousness is if we apply what we call materialistic science and start thinking that consciousness is created in the brain by our neurons, we get trapped. It just cannot be explained through just the biological nature of our brain. So what most people agree now is that consciousness is a field, a spectrum of energy from, like, not unlike persuasion, from low or no consciousness that you could say characterize states, for instance, of sleep or coma, to levels of consciousness that get into what's called meta-consciousness or hyper-consciousness, where you are working on your ability to observe your consciousness. And this is very important, for instance, in the healing process, because the more you can actually be present and see the patterns that are at play, for instance, in trauma or family dysfunctions and so on, the more you actually can restore the power to change them, right? And so consciousness is really a journey. It's not easy. There's tons of obstacles. Ego is a big one, right? Our self-driving, psyche is constantly trying to figure out, who is going to judge me? Am I cool? Am I competent? Am I pretty? And this and that. So we have to rid consciousness of these models that interfere, right? Distraction is one of the worst enemy of consciousness. So I've been exploring what modalities can raise consciousness, and there are basic modalities like working out, or breath work is wonderful, or yoga, right? All the way to psychedelic experiences where you get to enter a portal that propels you into a higher level state of consciousness, largely fueled chemically by excessive levels of serotonin. All psychedelics are serotonin agonists, and we know that serotonin is immediately boosting self-love and consciousness. And when you combine those two, you have moments and opportunities of neuroplasticity, which is the innate ability that we have to heal ourselves or rewrite our stories. And during those moments, these critical periods, as they're called by scientists, we can actually rewrite our stories. And that is only possible with elevated levels of consciousness.
Because you hear of like panpsychism, right?
Yeah.
Whereas consciousness is fundamental. Like it is like space, time, and consciousness, if you will.
Yep.
When you're saying we need to have elevated levels of consciousness, is it that serotonin primes our brain to be able to receive more of the consciousness that is around us?
That's right.
Or
we're
generating
the
consciousness.
panpsychism model is one that I'm very interested in because it's non-materialistic. It is promoting the idea that consciousness is all around us, that we in our brain have basically little antennas that are actually picking up consciousness that is in nature, consciousness that is in the cosmos. A stone for panpsychism has consciousness. And it sounds absurd, but it's actually very compelling, particularly as we get into quantum dimensions. We know that at the quantum level, particularly in the cells in our body, there are particles that have a role in consciousness. And so we're really, again, AI, to come back to that, is helping us, frankly, get outside of these rational models of materialistic thinking and question everything. Question Einstein's theory of gravity, which is largely being debunked now at the quantum level, right? So who would have thought that Newton or Einstein would be not thrown in the garbage, but entirely revised, right? So I think we're looking at opportunities to break out of models that have possibly limited our own expansion as humans.
Is there research that is out and about like panpsychism, or about like I've heard that antenna model 100,000 times, and people quote the biology of belief and like all of this stuff. And I'm not against it. I'm, to be clear, necessarily. I'm curious, what research do we have to support that we have
Quite
these
a
antennas?
bit.
Or like
there are some pretty impressive thinkers in that in that area. In my book Open, I talk quite a bit about Huffman and his work. Penrose, of course. These guys are so brilliant that it's hard to not pay attention. I have followed many of these thinkers for some time with a lot of disbelief and a lot of suspicion about the quality of their models. But I do think that we have been for too long dependent upon the pure scientific model, that if it's not material, if I can't see it, if I can, replicate the observation, it doesn't exist.
right.
How do you explain mentalists or people that have the ability to transmit information at distance and so on? There are so many cases of near-death experiences that, of course, defy what we understand to be death. At the physical level, people would like to believe it's just nothing. But at the spiritual level, I think you can really learn a lot from the thousands of cases of near-death experiences that do suggest or seem to suggest that there is something, bigger than the materialist dimension of our bodies.
Yeah. I feel like we'll land somewhere in the middle.
Maybe. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because there's new stuff coming out about macro physics as well. Like James Webb Telescope is coming out and like showing us that we thought that our segment of the universe was a representative sample of the entire universe, but now we're seeing portions of the universe that are like, we may be in a speck of very empty universe, but that is unusual for everything, the wider cosmos even further. And so like just blowing apart what we know about the universe in our, like, on a macro sense. And so it makes sense to me that there's just as much micro stuff as there is macro stuff that we don't know.
That's right. I mean, the re-emergence of quantum mechanics at the forefront of scientific discourse is amazing. I mean, it's over 100 years and was only a mathematical model, which is now becoming validated through, the use of tech that can literally prove the existence of some of those particles to be actually observable. I mean, it's mind-blowing. You're right. At the macro and micro, we are being exposed to information that was inconceivable just a few years ago.
So what makes science so exciting? Like,
yeah,
don't you just
it
love
does.
it? I love it. It's amazing. Yeah. Like, our entire scientific model is cracked. Hell yes, let's go.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, this whole idea of superposition, of being able to open up to the possibility that theories that we've believed would never be questioned are. And that opens the space for new theories.
Which is needed. So freaking needed. All right. As we're wrapping up here, I haven't gotten to this chapter yet in here, but I am curious about it because it's in the last chapter, chapter 10. I haven't gotten there yet. But one of the things is it says future-proofing human connection. I would love for you to double tap on that a little bit as we kind of wrap up here so we can end on human connection.
Well, I think, first of all, I was looking at showing that while we cannot necessarily predict where AI is going to be, 10 years from now, we can at least be influential as active, promoters of responsible AI. And I'm sure you've heard that term before. And responsible AI is protecting AI from biases. We know that when you train AI models on human data, we know that our human experience is full of biases. It's full of teaching that we don't want AI to be including. And so I think we have an opportunity, rather than blindly stuff AI with all the stuff that humans have produced, we can be more discerning and be willing to face the bugs, if you will, or the viruses that some of that data can include. And so that's the opportunity that I'm talking about, to improve data sets with new standards that are more critical of our past, of our history, that are improving upon by, in fact, asking AI to reveal these incongruences, to reveal these patterns of preferences that exist for, hiring white males over females. And all of that correction is going to be done by humans. I mean, AI models, I don't think, have the capacity to self-correct unless they have instructions to do so. I think we have an opportunity to get rid of a lot of noise and a lot of information that is just producing zero value in our life. And that hopefully can restore space and time for human connections, for discussions at the dinner table. I find myself often, and I do think it creates better conversation, of, instead of wondering, well, I'm not clear about what superposition is. During a conversation, you'll have some people who somehow declare themselves experts in quantum mechanics. Now we have chat, and we can all share, a moment of learning and expand on conversation based on, most of the time, credible data or description or definitions of concepts. So our human brain doesn't know everything, cannot hold all the knowledge, but AI can help us have more productive, probably less polarizing conversation. You know how humans are going to hold on to their opinions, and many of those opinions are based on nothing. Well, I think that we can use AI to disarm the tension in those conversations, to produce more productive dialogues between family members that may have different voting preferences, if you will.
Bro, I literally cannot believe you're bringing this up right now, because I recently, with a family member, had a conversation about the age of the Earth and their perspective that the Earth is only a couple thousand years old.
Yeah,
not
7,000. I can tell you
4.56 billion.
who that is. Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
And I was using ChatGPT to kind of, hey, give me some perspectives or some things that I could share that would show that, in fact, science suggests that the Earth is much older than a couple thousand years old, and things like that. It's interesting you just mentioned that could help us deepen human connection. The reaction, however, I feel like both parties would need to have access to the same level of prompting and understanding of how to get what they want out of AI. Because if I'm using it as a I gotcha, as opposed to a way for us to connect, that's the hard part. Because I was honestly just blown away. I was like, wait a minute, you what? Like, how did I not know this for 20 freaking years? That you had this perspective, like your son studies brain science, and this is what's going on. Like,
but so, the believers of these fallacies have been programmed and brainwashed for generations, and so I know some of those particular groups have in a way removed any form of education for these critical questions, and or rationalize that we are all under the illusion that the Earth is, billion years old or whatever it may be, forget the exact number, but we are the one that are being intoxicated by, media on the age of our planet. So it's a moment of reflection for all of us. How can people have been programmed at that level? It's, cult education is real. There's people who are in these systems where they are punished, shamed, ridiculed if they don't accept information that is obviously pure lies.
Right. What would be the best loving angle into updating some of those perspectives? You know, like how could you get into or through or persuade someone the opposite direction? Like if they've kind of fallen for some of those things.
Well, often the goal of these stories is to control people. It's to either scare them or control them. So the real question is, what other thinking or belief model can you suggest that is giving people more freedom, more free will, and more autonomy? I think we all want deep inside autonomy. I think we're born to not be free agents per se, but to have, the capacity to say yes or no. And often in those groups, there is levels of coercion or intimidation that puts people into some sort of a mental jail, if you will. So I think it needs to be done with psychology, with empathy. And there are people, therapists, that can do that very well, that can listen instead of judge, that can hold that tension instead of confronting the reality that you're given. So time, compassion, empathy, presence, hopefully can help.
Yeah. Yeah. This is kind of what I was thinking too. It's just so, in the moment, I was just so surprised. And I was just like, wait,
oh yeah,
what? Like, I didn't see it coming necessarily. So,
but I think, in my career as
a
a speaker, I've been in front of groups of people, and particularly in certain states in the United States where you find more of those representative. And because I was talking about the brain and the evolution of the brain, often people would kind of call me on it. She said, well, wait a second, you're saying that, that the brain is 500 million, the engineering behind the brain is 500 million years old. And, humans have been around for 7,000. I'm like, okay, well, let's assume that the primal brain is 7,000 years old. That's a lot of years of programming a survival center. So I try to move into the conversation rather than, address the belief, which is not possible to address with rationality,
That is exquisite freaking emotional regulation and ninja mastery movement on your part in relation to
yeah, it's
framing
like
that in that way. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like martial art. You have the technique of welcoming the blow, but avoiding it slightly and then moving on.
Exactly. That's exactly in my mind in that story. You're just like Neo, like in the Matrix, bending backwards. And
Neo is the Neo move. Yeah, got it.
Exactly. That's what it felt like. So
that's great.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I appreciate you hopping on again and having another conversation.
It's always fun to have a dialogue with you, Cody. We can go from conspiracy theorists to quantum physics and accessory talk about neuromarketing.
That's why I love it. Brain science, though. It's like neuroscience hits on all that stuff. So it's just like it's a never-ending field. It's like the final frontier. It's like we're in Star Trek. I love it. But I appreciate it, and I hope everybody gets Neuromarketing AI. Again, you can get it anywhere.
Yes, thank
Books
you
are sold.
for the plug.
Of course, yeah. No, I appreciate it so much. Thanks for sending me a copy too. Again,
of course
literally all your bugs. We need to get you on with Miu and Chloe for Open. That'd be another fun one where we go.
It's pretty
harder
Open
on that
is intense.
Side.
Talk about those themes of neuroplasticity and how to face trauma and addictions and depression and anxiety and so on. And we know all those numbers are going up, and it's pretty sad.
Yeah. I agree. Well, thank you so much for hopping on with us, and
see you in 26 maybe then.
Hey, let's do it, please.
All right.
And thank you everybody for hopping in here. We'll see you guys next time on the Decision Lab. If you have another expert you want us to talk to, drop in the comments. We'd love to hit them up. Otherwise, question everything, especially your own beliefs. See you next time.
All right. Take care.